Michael cherished the stability of his life, his accounting job, quiet family dinners, and weekend traditions with his wife Rachel. For over 2 decades, they built a routine that felt secure and unshakable, centered around their daughter Emily. When Emily left for college, Michael assumed their growing distance was a natural adjustment to an empty nest. Unbeknownst to him, Rachel saw their stability as stagnation. While Michael found comfort in routine, Rachel grew restless, yearning for excitement and fulfillment beyond the walls of their home. What Michael viewed as a phase was, for Rachel, the start of a slow unraveling. Michael Carter found himself subjected to an experience no spouse should endure. He unintentionally eavesdropped on a conversation where two men spoke loudly about his wife in a manner that was both graphic and appallingly detailed. They weren't making vague remarks, but were sharing explicit comparisons of their personal encounters with her. The vulgar descriptions bore no resemblance to the woman he had been married to for 21 years, let alone the mother of his child. At first, Michael couldn't reconcile their crude accounts with the life he shared with his wife. The incident occurred in a bar where Michael had joined his colleagues to toast the end of another exhausting week. A translucent glass divider separated him from the men, obscuring their faces but not their voices, which cut sharply through the ambient noise. Their careless volume hinted at inebriation, but that didn't soften the impact of their words, which pierced through Michael's reality, leaving a raw wound of disbelief and anxiety. Initially, Michael struggled to connect the conversation to his own life. By the time he started processing their remarks, a large portion of their discussion had already passed him by. What lingered in his memory was fragmented, a patchwork of phrases reconstructed from the snippets he caught after he finally began paying attention. It wasn't until one of them mentioned a name that his focus sharpened. "Carter, that woman from accounting," one of them said, his tone dripping with smugness and drunken overconfidence. Hearing his name linked to such degrading comments jolted Michael like a physical blow. It yanked him out of his casual indifference. Indeed, his wife, Rachel, worked in accounting for a well-known firm, the same company the men referenced seconds later. That detail alone made him listen more closely. However, the words they used to describe her were so far removed from the Rachel he knew and cherished that he couldn't immediately reconcile their conversation with his wife. Despite his denial, something about their remarks lodged itself deep in his mind, gnawing at him and sowing seeds of doubt. The specificity of their statements felt too precise to dismiss entirely. Restless and disturbed, he instinctively moved closer to hear more, but it seemed the conversation was already ending. One man burped loudly while the other muttered something about leaving. Peeking around the corner, Michael caught a glimpse of one man's retreating figure as he exited the bar. The individual was heavy-set with a bald patch on his head. Michael had no idea who the other man might have been. The pub was bustling with activity, making it impossible to identify him. When Michael arrived home about 30 minutes later, Rachel wasn't there. Another half-hour passed and still no sign of her. He found himself wondering if his thoughts would have taken a different turn, if not for the obnoxious conversation he had overheard earlier. Or perhaps those very remarks had planted a seed of doubt. It seemed absurd. Rachel deserved her moments to unwind just as much as he did. She didn't need to stick to a schedule to decide when it was time to come home. Still, she could have called. She usually did when her plans stretched later into the evening. That was when he realized she had been doing this more often lately, arriving home late, forgetting to call. It wasn't just tonight. These instances had been building up over months, maybe even the past year. After another hour ticked by, Michael decided to call her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He tried her office line, but the cleaner answered and told him everyone had left hours ago. Moments later, Rachel rushed through the front door. What excuse will it be this time? Michael thought. Traffic? A flat tire? Maybe he could accept a delay. But 2 hours with no explanation? Could it have been unexpected overtime? Possible, but unlikely on a Friday evening. Besides, the office cleaner had made it clear. The place was empty. Could she have simply lost track of time with friends? Maybe, but Rachel had never been this late without at least a quick message. When she entered, she didn't offer an excuse. In fact, she said nothing except a casual, "Hi." Without hesitation, she darted upstairs to take a shower, a rare habit for her after coming home. When she returned, she looked refreshed. Her skin glowed, her damp hair framed her face, and she wore a crisp white blouse with a linen skirt. She grabbed an apron and asked Michael to set the table while she prepared dinner. He didn't respond, and she eventually noticed. After slipping a casserole into the oven and beginning to chop vegetables for a salad, she turned to him. "Is something wrong?" she asked, drying her hands. Michael met her gaze for the first time that evening. "Maybe I should be asking you," he replied. She stared back, puzzled. "Asking me what?" "I was worried. You were late?" "You didn't call," he said. Rachel glanced at the clock, her brow furrowing slightly. "Oh my, I didn't realize it was so late," she said, covering her mouth with one hand. She walked over, draping her arms around his neck. "I'm sorry, honey. I lost track of time." Her blue eyes locked onto his, projecting a look that could only be described as apologetic. Michael gently removed her hands from his neck and placed them between them. "Let's eat," he said, brushing off the moment. "I'm starving." Later that night, they attempted to make love, but it was an awkward, disjointed experience. Michael found himself struggling to stay in the moment, and Rachel seemed distant in a way that felt unfamiliar. It was a disaster for both of them. The next morning, they shared a quiet breakfast. Michael had a muffin while Rachel opted for cereal and fruit. They weren't big on breakfast, but the tension was palpable. Rachel, still in her robe, sipped her coffee while Michael, in his running gear, eyed her cautiously. Finally, he broke the silence. "Will talking help, Rachel?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "Help with what?" she replied. "I think you're cheating on me," he said bluntly. "I think you're seeing someone else." Rachel's expression didn't change. She didn't blink, flinch, or fidget. She just stared at him, her face unreadable. Michael's cheeks flushed hot with embarrassment and anger. "Why, Rachel?" he managed to say. "Why, Michael?" she echoed, her voice calm but sharp. Her expression shifted to something resembling disdain. "Why would you think I'm cheating on you?" Michael felt the weight of her words. She never called him by his name unless she was upset, offended, or serious. Usually it was just, "honey." Now her tone bordered on incredulous. "Why accuse me, Michael?" she demanded, her voice rising. Michael raised his hand, signaling for her to lower hers. He explained the overheard comments at the pub, her tardiness, the lack of a call, and her strange behavior, the showering, the lack of affection during their attempt at intimacy. He stumbled over his words, embarrassed by his own doubts and the awkwardness of articulating them. He hated accusing her, yet the thoughts felt unavoidable. Rachel pushed her chair back abruptly and stood, clutching her robe tightly around her. "I don't have to listen to this," she said, leaving the kitchen. Michael sat frozen, unsure of whether to follow her. Was it cowardice? Indecision? Fear? No, he realized. It was none of those. He stayed in his seat because deep down he believed he already had his answer. Rachel had always been confrontational, almost welcoming arguments when she felt wronged. Yet now, she had walked away, abandoning the discussion entirely. That silence, he thought, said everything he needed to know. She didn't fight back or try to defend herself. She walked away, leaving the conflict unresolved. That wasn't like Rachel, and Michael knew exactly why. She had no defense because he was right. Rachel had been unfaithful. When Rachel Carter came back from a quick trip to the grocery store, she stepped into an eerily quiet house. It didn't catch her off guard. In fact, she had expected it. She had deliberately purchased fewer groceries, skipping the usual cans of beer and much of the meat she'd normally buy. Michael was gone. She had been certain of it, and the empty house confirmed her prediction. A folded note sat on the kitchen counter. She read it quickly, her face betraying no emotion, then crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, breaking the silence. Rachel poured hot water over a tea bag and carried her cup out to the deck, where the late afternoon sun bathed her in warmth. She sipped her tea and gazed at the yard. Did she feel regret? She supposed she might miss Michael in some ways, the easy familiarity, the shared routines, and the long history they had together. But she also felt something close to relief. The truth was, she had been preparing for this moment for a long time, over 2 years to be exact. Rachel rarely stopped to analyze how she had managed to cheat on Michael so effortlessly with so little guilt. She guessed it came down to a lack of respect. He didn't command it, so she didn't give it. Michael, in her eyes, had faded into a shadow of what a man should be. Compared to others she encountered, men who were assertive and commanding, Michael felt like a placeholder. He was too accommodating, always deferring to her. What some women might see as love and devotion, Rachel found suffocating and dull. Then there was Tom Benson. If ever there was a man who embodied everything Michael was not, it was Tom. Tall, confident, and ambitious, he had joined her company 6 months ago. Tom exuded an energy that drew Rachel in immediately. It hadn't taken long for them to become lovers. Michael's discovery of her affair hadn't surprised her. If anything, it was shocking it had taken this long. His obliviousness felt like one last insult, another piece of evidence of his disinterest. Rachel's affairs had begun 2 years earlier, shortly after their daughter Emily left for college. At first, they were fleeting, flirtations that escalated unexpectedly. But recently, they had grown more deliberate. She had embraced the freedom of her newfound desires, indulging in a series of relationships with younger, attractive men. Surprisingly, finding willing partners had been easy. Rachel knew she was still beautiful. She worked hard to maintain her looks. Much of her income went toward her appearance, a carefully curated wardrobe, high-end lingerie, professional hairstyling, and flawless makeup. Michael never objected to these expenses, never even seemed to notice. She doubted he saw her as anything other than his wife of 40-something years, but the young men she met saw her as something entirely different. They were drawn to her confidence and allure, and Rachel reveled in their attention. Her life now felt worlds away from the monotonous existence she had shared with Michael. She had been clear with herself from the start. If Michael ever uncovered her infidelity, she wouldn't fight to save the marriage. She'd accept a divorce and walk away without hesitation. But she also resolved not to be reckless. She avoided taking risks that might expose her, never brought her affairs into their home, and always crafted plausible excuses for her absences. She even ensured she didn't make love to Michael on the same day she was with another man. She considered this her small concession to him, proof in her mind that she wasn't entirely heartless. Over the past year, her escapades had expanded. She had slept with colleagues, clients, and, on occasion, indulged in group encounters. These affairs weren't just thrilling. They boosted her confidence and even benefited her career. A recent promotion and a generous bonus were, she believed, indirect rewards for her boldness. But now, things were different. The thrill of sneaking around had dulled, replaced by a sense of inconvenience. Secrets were burdensome rather than exhilarating. And of course, there was Tom. Tom wasn't just another fling. He had captivated her entirely. Was it love? Rachel wasn't sure. What she did know was that she couldn't stop thinking about him. He occupied her thoughts and dreams, making her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Tom wasn't gentle. He was rough, demanding, and unapologetic, and she craved every bit of it. When he asked her to make a life with him, she didn't hesitate to imagine what that might look like. That Friday afternoon, while two of her work friends loudly gossiped in a pub at her suggestion, Rachel had spent hours with Tom in a motel. She'd deliberately stayed out late and skipped the customary check-in call to Michael. When she arrived home, she didn't offer an excuse, barely acknowledging her husband before retreating for a long shower. The shower was intentional, a small breadcrumb meant to draw his suspicion. That night, she even initiated lovemaking, certain he would notice the subtle signs of her betrayal. And he had. His inability to perform was confirmation enough. By now, Rachel was over the pretense. Michael's confrontation and subsequent departure didn't rattle her. If anything, it confirmed what she already knew. Her future was no longer tied to him. Her life with Tom, unpredictable, passionate, and alive, awaited her. The wave of guilt that flickered through her was brief, but its mere presence annoyed her. The next morning, over breakfast, Rachel surprised even herself. When Michael confronted her directly, asking if she had been unfaithful, the words caught in her throat. She had orchestrated this moment, yet when it finally arrived, she couldn't bring herself to confess. Instead, she let the silence hang in the air, speaking for her. Was it lingering love for Michael that held her back? Shame? She chuckled to herself, incredulous. Maybe I do still care for him, she thought, almost amused by the notion. It wasn't love in the romantic sense, but more of a quiet, distant fondness, a bond that had dulled over the years, worn thin by routine and time. They had been married for over 21 years, their relationship forged through shared struggles, a home they had built together, and the memories that came with it. But most of those ties had already loosened, leaving only a few fragile threads. The strongest of those was Emily, their daughter, the vibrant, intelligent proof that their love had once been real. If she loved Michael at all now, it was because of Emily. Rachel sighed, taking a sip of her tea as she pondered the situation. Was she really supposed to suppress her desires? Her deep, undeniable yearning for passion, just because Michael no longer fulfilled her? Because he had grown too predictable, too dull. It felt absurd to blame herself for craving more. Denying her needs would only lead to resentment, to becoming a bitter, prematurely aged woman. What good would that do? Life was fleeting, she reasoned. To ignore its pleasures would be the real sin. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was Tom. Just the sound of his voice sent a thrill through her. The day before, he had told her she was incredible, better than anyone he had ever been with. Younger women couldn't compare, he had said. The memory made her smile as she confirmed their next meeting. Tonight, he would come to her house for the first time. It felt bold, but the thought excited her. Life was sweet. With a playful smirk, she climbed the stairs to try on a new silk outfit. Her steps were light, her mood buoyant. Meanwhile, Michael was reflecting on how little he truly knew his wife. That realization, he thought, was the hardest blow of all. It was as though the foundation of his life had been ripped away, leaving only shards of memories and illusions. He wondered how he had missed the signs, how he hadn't seen Rachel drifting further from him over the past year. He had chalked it up to the empty nest, to Emily leaving for college, and to Rachel throwing herself into her full-time job. But now it was clear he had been blind. Michael considered the way he had lived his life. Like many men, he had always been focused on the future, on projects, goals, and challenges. His mind had been consumed by what was ahead, not by the present. He had trusted that Rachel would always be there, taking care of the now, while he built their future. It was naive, perhaps, but also comforting. He had believed he was secure. He realized now how little time he had spent truly observing Rachel, understanding her needs and desires. Women, he thought, lived in the present in a way men didn't. They wove their lives into the here and now, creating intricate connections between family, friends, and communities. Men, meanwhile, got lost in their own ambitions, blind to the web being spun around them. It wasn't until they were caught, like he was now, that they finally noticed. Michael's thoughts wandered as he sat alone in a shabby motel a few miles from home. He had left the house early that morning, throwing a suitcase into the car and driving aimlessly until he landed there. Unable to sit still, he decided to go for a hike, something he hadn't done in years. Rachel had never shared his love for the outdoors. She was more drawn to beaches and shopping malls. But hiking had always been his escape, his way of finding clarity. As he walked through the woods, memories of his younger self came flooding back. He had been adventurous then, exploring trails and rafting rivers. Meeting Rachel had changed everything. She had been out of his league, a vibrant social whirlwind compared to his quiet, serious demeanor. She was beautiful and full of life, and he had been completely captivated. He had never understood why she chose him, but he didn't question it. He simply drank in her passion, feeling as though he had been saved from a barren existence. In those early years, their connection had felt unshakable. They had faced challenges together, finding joy in even the simplest things. And then there was Emily, their miracle. Her birth had been complicated, and while it hadn't endangered Rachel's life, it had meant they couldn't have more children. Rachel's hysterectomy had been a painful but necessary decision. As Michael walked, he couldn't help but wonder if their love had simply run its course. Had it been doomed from the start, a mismatch that only time could reveal? Or had he failed to nurture it, too consumed by his own distractions to notice Rachel slipping away? Whatever the answer, he knew one thing for certain. The life they had shared was gone, and there was no going back. Was loyalty proof of love? Michael wondered as he trekked through the dunes, the coarse sand crunching beneath his boots and the tall grasses whispering in the wind. Years ago, when Rachel had been forced into a hysterectomy after Emily's birth, he hadn't hesitated. He'd shared her fate and had a vasectomy. At the time, it had seemed the ultimate act of solidarity, a quiet declaration of their shared future. Whether she had appreciated the gesture was something he couldn't recall. More recently, her words stung. "What if you meet someone else and want kids?" she had asked last year, her tone sharp with incredulity. He'd laughed it off, thinking she was joking, but now her question gnawed at him. The wind, sharp and relentless, began to clear the fog in his mind. He realized how much of his recent past had blurred into an indistinct haze. The numbness had become so familiar he hadn't even noticed it. As he sat on a fallen tree trunk overlooking the valley, it dawned on him. Some kinds of love aren't healthy. They creep into your soul, eating away at your confidence, blinding you to the cracks in your partner's affection, and quietly convincing you to abandon parts of yourself. For the first time in years, he noticed the vibrant green of the May trees, the dazzling blue of a freshly washed sky, and the shimmer of sunlight on a winding stream. The beauty was almost too much, like seeing a world he'd forgotten existed. The pain came next, raw and unfiltered. He thought about how, for years, he had softened the sharp edges of reality to avoid confronting the truth about Rachel. It was as though he'd coated his life in a protective film, a Vaseline blur over the lens of his marriage. But now, sitting alone on that tree, the veil was gone, ripped away to expose the stark, unforgiving truth. His shoulders shook as muffled sobs escaped him. It wasn't just Rachel's betrayal that overwhelmed him. It was the realization of how much he had betrayed himself. Sorting through the wreckage of their life together felt impossible in that moment. The memories, the love, the hurt, they all poured out in a chaotic flood. But as he sat there, he began to sift through it, piece by piece. Among the debris, there was one undeniable jewel: Emily. No matter what else crumbled, she remained his anchor, the proof of what had once been beautiful between him and Rachel. The sun was dipping low now, its golden light casting long shadows. Michael rose stiffly, his legs protesting, and began the slow walk back to his motel. He had a phone call to make. Rachel Carter barely paused as she shook out her polished nails, the deep burgundy shade gleaming under the bedroom's soft light. She held her phone gingerly, careful not to smudge the glossy finish. Emily's voice, tinny and concerned, came through the speaker. "Dad just called. He said he left you. Mom, what's going on?" Rachel groaned inwardly, her annoyance flickering to the surface before she smoothed it over. Did Michael have to tell Emily now, of all times? "Honey, don't worry," she said, keeping her tone sweet and steady. "We'll talk about it tomorrow, okay? This isn't a conversation to have over the phone." "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily pressed. "What happened?" Rachel glanced at the clock. Tom would be there any minute and she wasn't even dressed. "Darling, it's nothing you need to stress over. Just adult stuff between your dad and me. Let's meet tomorrow, okay? Noon at that little cafe by the gym." There was a heavy pause on the line, but Rachel didn't wait for Emily to respond. "I really have to go now, sweetie. Love you." She hung up, slipping the phone back onto the vanity as she stood and stepped into her burgundy heels. The shoes added an extra 4 inches, making her legs look longer as she examined herself in the full-length mirror. Tucking her blouse into her skirt, she admired the way the fabric clung to her body. A satisfied smile curled on her lips. "You're stunning," she whispered to her reflection as the doorbell rang. The next day, Michael sat across from Emily in a small, intimate Italian restaurant. Her eyes, wide and searching, never left his face. "You look tired," she said softly, her concern evident. Michael gave her a small, weary smile. "It's good to see you, sweetheart," he said, reaching out to hold her hand. After the waitress brought their drinks and bread, Emily finally asked the question he had been dreading. "Dad, what happened? What's going on with Mom?" Michael swirled the wine in his glass, watching the ruby liquid catch the candlelight. He took a breath. "Your mother doesn't need me anymore." Emily's gasp cut through the cozy atmosphere. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" Michael placed a hand over hers. "Sweetheart, when your mother and I met, it was magic. Everything about her, her energy, her beauty, she swept me off my feet. We were deeply in love. You were the greatest gift of that love. If you ever want proof of how much we cared for each other, just look in the mirror. You're the best of us." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Michael's voice wavered as he continued. "But things change, honey. Over time, your mom stopped loving me the way she used to. I didn't see it then, or maybe I didn't want to, but now I know." Emily looked stricken, her hands trembling. "Dad, He shook his head gently. "Don't blame yourself. This isn't about you. It's about your mom and me, and how we let each other slip away." He squeezed her hand. "But I'll always love you. That's never going to change." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was also full of understanding. For the first time, Michael felt a glimmer of peace. Emily was his clarity, his connection to what had once been real and beautiful. And that, at least, was something worth holding on to. Michael paused, glancing down at the table before meeting Emily's tear-filled eyes. She had begun shaking her head, her blonde hair falling across her face as if to physically block out what she was hearing. He lifted a hand gently to calm her. "Sweetheart, listen," he began, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I think, over time, I just wasn't enough for your mother. Maybe she needed someone stronger, more assertive, someone ambitious, who could light up a room and command attention. But that's never been who I am. I thought she loved me for being myself, for being steady." A faint, regretful smile touched his lips. He glanced away, lost in thought for a moment. "I gave her everything I thought she wanted. I worked hard, gave her comfort and stability, but maybe I never really gave her what she needed." Emily looked at him. her confusion evident, her eyes pleading for clarity. He pressed on, his words strangely calm, as though he had rehearsed them in his mind. The truth is, honey, time changes things. It wears you down quietly and relentlessly. It doesn't just dull your passion, it makes you stop noticing the things that used to matter. And sometimes you wake up one day and realize you've let something precious slip away. Please, Daddy, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm sorry. I shouldn't burden you with this, but I want you to know it doesn't mean I didn't love her. I loved her deeply, and I loved you with everything I had. That love made every long day at work worth it. But looking back, maybe I didn't express it in the ways she needed most. Emily's hand tightened around his as their appetizers arrived. She picked at her salad, her appetite gone. Michael pushed the antipasti around his plate without tasting a bite. Your mother and I saw life differently, he continued after a heavy pause. I poured myself into work and the joy of creating and building. I thought that was enough for both of us. But for her, I don't think it was. And then, when you grew up and left for college, she found herself alone with time and no one to fill it with. I didn't see how hard that was for her. Emily's face paled. He hesitated, afraid of saying too much, but he had already come this far. After you left, she started changing. She worked more, dressed differently, spent more time at the gym, and I thought it was just her way of dealing with the empty nest. I wanted to support her, but now, looking back, I see she was searching for something else. Something I wasn't giving her. Emily's voice was small, barely above a whisper. It wasn't just work, was it? Michael exhaled slowly, as though releasing a weight he had carried for too long. No, honey, I don't think it was. At first, maybe she convinced herself it was about career or independence, but eventually, it became something more. Proof, I guess. Proof that she was still vibrant, still noticed, still desirable. Emily looked down at her plate, tears falling silently. Did you talk to her about it? She asked after a moment. Michael shook his head. We didn't. We drifted. We lived side by side, but not together. I didn't ask, and she didn't offer. I thought she seemed happy. I was busy, always busy. Emily's eyes searched his, desperate for some hopeful resolution. Maybe it's just a phase. Maybe she'll regret it, Dad. He smiled sadly, shaking his head. No, honey, I don't think so. This isn't just about other men. It's about her finding validation in a way I can't give her. I don't think she'll stop, and I don't think she wants to. You have to talk to her, Emily said, her voice breaking. I will, if it matters to you, he replied, though his tone carried little conviction. Daddy, Emily said, her voice cracking. This is so unfair. It's so sad. Michael nodded, his own sadness reflected in his daughter's face. It is, sweetheart, but we can't change it now. The only thing we can do is move forward. The waitress arrived with their pastas, removing the barely touched appetizers. Emily picked up her fork, though the weight of the conversation had stolen her appetite. Michael leaned forward, his voice gentle. Eat, honey. You need your strength. Emily nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she twirled pasta onto her fork. As they ate in silence, the heaviness of the moment hung between them, unspoken but understood. For Michael, there was a bittersweet comfort in knowing that even as his marriage unraveled, his bond with his daughter remained strong. Rachel Carter settled into a shadowed corner of the terrace, her damp hair framing her glowing face. The sheen wasn't from the gym equipment she had just used, nor solely from the UV session she had indulged in. It was the result of her luxury cream, a potion she paid handsomely for to maintain her youthful look. She knew better than to risk the harshness of the sun at her age. Her gym routine had started decades ago, back when Emily was born. Determined to shed the weight of pregnancy, Rachel had become relentless with her fitness. 3 days a week became every other day in recent years, and she had no regrets. The payoff was obvious. The way younger men flirted with her, the approving glances she caught in mirrors, the ease with which she slipped into dresses she'd worn in her 20s. Even here, surrounded by toned bodies, Rachel knew she held her own. She didn't need surgery. Her firm physique and naturally smooth skin outshone the frozen Botox masks of her competition. Sipping her fruit juice, Rachel smiled in quiet satisfaction. Her world felt perfect until it didn't. Across the terrace, Emily appeared, weaving through tables with effortless grace. The resemblance was striking. The golden curls, sunlit and natural, bounced freely. Her complexion glowed with an unspoiled vitality. Her blue eyes sparkled with innocence. and her movements carried no pretense. Emily wasn't trying to captivate anyone. She simply existed, and that was enough. Rachel felt a sharp pang in her chest. Envy, though she refused to name it as such. Rising to greet her daughter, she leaned in for a kiss that never landed, their lips brushing only air. Pleasantries came first, followed by brief updates and a second round of juice. But soon, a quiet tension settled over the table. Emily, always perceptive, noticed the lack of warmth in her mother's small talk, a disinterest she had never felt before. Something had shifted after her dinner with Michael. Her father's words had cast her mother in a new light, pulling Rachel from the shadows into sharp focus. What Emily now saw was no longer the mother she had idolized, but a complex, flawed individual, stripped of the unconditional love that had once clouded her judgment. Emily set her glass down firmly. "Mom, you know why I'm here. What's going on?" Rachel hesitated, her lashes fluttering as if buying time. "Oh, honey, it's unfortunate. But these things happen all the time, don't they?" Her voice was soft, rehearsed. "Your father and we've grown apart. It's just one of those things. I always thought we'd grow old together, but—" She sighed, reaching for Emily's hand. "It wasn't meant to be. But please know that we both love you. That will never change." Emily stared at her, stunned. The words felt hollow, plucked from a script. She couldn't believe her mother thought she'd accept such cliches. Waving a hand dismissively, Emily interrupted, her voice sharp. "Mom, come on. It's me, Emily, your daughter who's almost as smart as you are. Cut the act." Rachel blinked, her polished composure cracking for an instant. Was that a blush creeping under her carefully applied makeup? She sighed again, this time with less conviction. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You're right. I've been awful. I don't know how to explain this." "Try the truth," Emily shot back, surprised by her own boldness. She had never spoken to her mother like this, but Rachel's pretense left her no choice. Rachel shifted in her designer chair, her manicured nails tapping her glass. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, vanishing almost as quickly as it appeared. "Emily, this is really between your father and me. We've changed. That's all. People grow apart. Please, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." The casual dismissal lit a fire in Emily. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" she demanded, her voice tight with anger she hadn't expected to feel. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, her lips trembling. "It's for the best, darling. Believe me." Before Emily could respond, a voice called out from the terrace entrance. Rachel turned, her body stiffening. A tall, well-groomed man with golden hair approached, exuding confidence. He looked to be in his mid-30s. Rachel stood awkwardly, her eyes darting between Emily and the man as he reached their table. For the first time in years, Rachel seemed unsure of herself. The man resolved the tension himself, pulling Rachel into a hug. His mouth moved toward hers, but she turned her head at the last moment, leaving his kiss to land on her cheek. "Tom," she said, her voice shaky. "This is my daughter, Emily. Emily, meet Tom. We work together." Emily's sharp eyes flicked between her mother and Tom, taking in every detail. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was witnessing. Whatever this was, it went far beyond work. Emily smiled politely as she shook Tom's hand, enduring his smooth compliments with forced civility. She noticed everything about him. The crisp white polo stretched across his broad chest, the perfectly tailored slacks, the golden tan of his arms. He even had the audacity to joke that she and Rachel could pass for sisters. Then he leaned in close to Rachel, murmuring something just out of earshot. Rachel's nervous nod and subtle push to distance herself from him only added to the awkwardness. Tom laughed loudly, said, "See ya, honey," and strolled back toward the entrance where two of his buddies waited. A burst of laughter followed them as they disappeared inside. Emily turned her attention to her mother, her jaw tightening. "Are you sleeping with him, Mom?" she asked bluntly, her voice low but cutting. Rachel froze, the color draining from her face before it was replaced by a flush of anger. "Where do you get off speaking to me like that, Emily?" she snapped. "I'm your mother. I don't have to answer such a question." Emily didn't flinch. "You are, aren't you? It's obvious. How long has this been going on? Did Dad find out?" Rachel's voice climbed an octave. "You're wrong. You have no idea what you're talking about. Tom and I work together. We're friends. That's it. Friends. Can a woman have friends without being judged by her self-righteous daughter?" Her outburst drew glances from nearby tables, but Emily remained calm. She pushed her chair back slowly, the scrape of its legs harsh against the stone patio. "Friends, huh? Is that really all you have to say?" Rachel stopped her frantic gestures, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. Her voice hardened. I don't owe you any explanations, Emily. Emily stood, her expression cold. Fine. Don't bother calling me until you're ready to be honest. Preferably with the truth. Rachel gasped, reaching out as though to stop her. Emily, no, don't listen to your father. He's poisoning you against me. You don't understand. Emily froze mid-turn, throwing a sharp look over her shoulder. You mean Dad? God, you don't know him at all, do you? Did you ever? You're pathetic, Mom. Enjoy yourself. Without another word, Emily strode away, her blonde curls bouncing with each step. Rachel stood rooted in place, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Screw you, Michael, she hissed under her breath. Screw you. For the first time in what felt like years, Michael slept soundly that night. The weight of recent events had lifted slightly, replaced by the kind of clarity that spurred action. It wasn't just the hike or the dinner with Emily. It was the plan forming in his mind. A good plan, one that brought a flicker of excitement and purpose back into his life. Yesterday, he had reached out to Frank, an old friend he hadn't seen in months. Guilt tugged at him for calling out of the blue, but Frank had been gracious. After all, isn't that what lifelong friends are for? The two had known each other since grade school, their bond enduring through years of separation when Frank went away for college. They'd reconnected when Frank returned to open a psychology practice, and their families had become close, until Rachel abruptly cut ties 2 years ago. She never gave a clear reason, leaving Michael embarrassed and confused. Frank's wife Marie had apparently felt the same, and the friendship between the two families dissolved without explanation. Despite Rachel's insistence that he keep his distance, Michael had maintained his friendship with Frank, sneaking in the occasional night of pool or beer at the bar. Last night, he'd unloaded everything. Rachel's infidelity, the moment he discovered it, and her cold reaction when confronted. He spoke about the emptiness he'd been living with, the gray fog that had settled over his life for years without his noticing. Frank listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to alarm. When Michael paused, Frank surprised him with an apology, not as a friend, but as a psychologist. I should have seen it, Frank admitted, guilt in his voice. You've been showing classic signs of depression for years. I should have noticed. The words hit Michael hard, but they also rang true. Frank explained how Michael's withdrawal, his obsession with work, and his detachment from the world were all symptoms. Even Michael's tendency to blame himself for Rachel's unhappiness was part of the illness. Frank described how depression creeps in quietly, often unnoticed by even those closest to the person suffering. Your job didn't notice as long as you performed. Emily was too busy starting her own life to see it. And Rachel? Frank hesitated. Rachel had her own distractions. Michael nodded slowly, the realization settling over him. Depression had dulled his senses and his spirit, leaving him vulnerable. Rachel's emotional withdrawal and eventual betrayal had only deepened the wound. Yet, he understood now that he hadn't failed because he wasn't good enough. He had been fighting an invisible enemy all along. Frank's words gave Michael something he hadn't felt in years: clarity. He was no longer willing to wallow in blame or let Rachel's choices define his future. As he left the bar that night, a plan began to form, a way to rebuild himself, reclaim his happiness, and let go of the weight he had carried for far too long. It wasn't about revenge or fixing the past. It was about moving forward, one step at a time. Rachel Carter stared out the airplane window as the Vegas skyline vanished beneath the clouds. The man beside her, with his chiseled jaw and confident air, should have been a source of excitement. But as the plane climbed, the rush of takeoff filled her not with butterflies, but with emptiness. Vegas had promised her everything, a whirlwind escape of opulence and indulgence. Tom had spared no expense. Their sprawling suite overlooking the city, lavish dinners, dazzling shows, and endless compliments. She had soaked in his undivided attention, relishing the fantasy of being adored. The nights were a blur of passion, leaving her body sore and covered in bruises. Yet instead of fulfillment, she felt hollow, like a shiny facade stripped bare. The first day had felt like heaven. She could still picture the moment they stepped into their suite, its glittering view of the city spreading out before them like a dream. Overwhelmed by excitement, she'd thrown herself into Tom's arms, their clothes discarded in a frantic rush before the bellboy had even closed the door. From there, it was a carousel of decadence: swimming, shopping, fine dining, and dancing. But the cracks began to show when they returned to the suite that night. Tom had kissed her hungrily in the elevator, whispering for her to take a long shower and make herself irresistible for him. She had giggled, drunk on his attention, and retreated to the bathroom, her body scented with perfume. When she stepped out, she expected to find something luxurious laid out for her, perhaps a silk negligee or a set of elegant lingerie. Instead, on the bed were a pair of cheap fishnet stockings and absurdly high red platform heels. Her excitement wavered, but she tried to laugh it off, calling for Tom. There was no answer. "Tom!" she called again, slipping the stockings up her legs with hesitant hands. She tottered awkwardly in the heels, feeling ridiculous. The door to the suite swung open. The man who entered was not Tom. He was a giant in a crisp blue suit, flanked by two similarly dressed men. Rachel's stomach plummeted. "Wrong room," she said, her voice a nervous squeak. "You've got the wrong room. Please leave." The men didn't stop. They chuckled, their laughter low and predatory. "Tom! Tom!" Rachel shouted, desperation creeping into her voice. But the men only laughed harder. What followed was a night she could barely piece together. Flashes of pain, humiliation, and fear lingered in her memory like shards of broken glass. When she finally woke, the sun was streaming through the windows, and the clock read nearly noon. Her body felt like a battlefield. Bruises and bites covered her skin, and the sheets clung to her in damp, sticky patches. Stumbling into the bathroom, she caught her reflection in the mirror and groaned. Mascara streaked her face, her lipstick smudged and smeared. White powder lined her nostrils, traces of a substance she didn't remember taking. The shower's jets pummeled her sore body, the hot water washing away some of her physical exhaustion, but none of her shame. When the steam cleared, she inspected herself again. The bites and bruises were unmistakable. Even the soft bathrobe felt abrasive against her skin. Back in the suite, a fresh breakfast tray awaited her. The food was still warm, so it must have been delivered while she was in the shower. She sat down, ravenous, halfway through her scrambled eggs when the door to the suite opened again. Her heart sank. Tom strolled into the suite wearing an immaculate Armani suit and his trademark smug grin. Before Rachel could react, he grabbed her shoulders from behind, his presence immediately suffocating. She jerked away, her voice sharp and defiant. "Get your hands off me!" she shouted, her face a mix of anger and humiliation. Tom chuckled, dodging the spoon she hurled at him. "Relax, honey," he said casually, as if her outrage were an overreaction. Rachel's voice rose, trembling with fury. "Relax? You left me with those monsters! What the hell is wrong with you? I've never felt so humiliated in my life!" He seized her flailing arms, pinning them to her sides. His face hovered inches from hers, his tone dripping with mockery. "Humiliated? Really, Rachel? You're a better actress than I thought. If you didn't love every second of it, you should win an Oscar." Releasing her roughly, Tom stepped back, his grin unfazed. Rachel collapsed into a chair, her wet hair clinging to her face. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tape?" Tom smirked, helping himself to a sausage from her breakfast plate. "Oh, yes. You're the star, sweetheart. And the best part? It's just episode 1 of 3. On the plane back from Vegas, Rachel sat beside him, her oversized sunglasses barely concealing the dark circles under her eyes. Her head pounded, the hangover pressing against her temples like a vice. "I thought you cared about me," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion and betrayal. Tom looked up from his magazine, grinning as if she'd told a joke. "Who, me?" he asked, his tone dripping with insincerity. Tears brimmed in her eyes. He patted her arm, feigning sympathy. "Of course I care, honey. You have no idea how much money you made me this weekend." Rachel turned her face to the window, her silent sobs shaking her shoulders. The realization hit her like a freight train. She had been nothing but a pawn in his game, decades of life experience, and she had learned nothing since she was a teenager. Tom hadn't let her leave the suite after the first night. He ordered a masseuse to soothe her battered body and had food sent up via room service. He also forced pills into her hand, making her swallow them without question. Then he dressed her like a doll in a cheap vinyl outfit with impossibly high platform boots. He sent her back to the bathroom to perfect her appearance until her reflection matched his fantasies. The second night was worse. 5 men this time. 2 were overweight. 1 was old enough to be her father, and she barely remembered when she passed out. The morning after, she begged to leave, even threatening to harm herself, but Tom had only laughed. By the time they left Vegas, Rachel was a shell of herself. She shuffled through the airport like an elderly woman, her oversized sunglasses doing little to mask her misery. "I hate you," she muttered as they settled into their seats. Tom didn't even glance at her, flipping a page in his magazine. "I know, honey," he said with a dismissive smirk. Meanwhile, Michael was closing the chapter on his old life. The door to what had once been his home shut softly behind him. He slipped the key into his pocket and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The day promised sunshine, a fitting backdrop to the transformation he was about to embark on. The past few days had been a whirlwind, finalizing divorce papers, resigning from his job of over 20 years and packing up what little he wanted to take with him had been both exhausting and liberating. He left behind a career he had poured himself into and a house that no longer felt like home. What remained was clarity, the kind that came from wiping a slate clean. That morning, he took one last walk through the empty house. The familiar rooms were stripped of most personal touches. A few photos were gone, and closets stood half empty. But the space felt lighter, as if it too had been unburdened. In the kitchen, Michael placed a thick envelope against the vase Emily had made in kindergarten, a misshapen but cherished piece. Inside the envelope were divorce papers and the business card of his lawyer. Rachel would find it when she returned. It was all she needed to move forward, without him. Stepping outside, Michael's gaze landed on the camper waiting in the driveway, its silver exterior gleaming in the morning sun. Running a hand along its aluminum side, he felt a rush of anticipation. Climbing into the driver's seat, he gripped the large steering wheel and was transported back to childhood, sitting in his Uncle William's lap in a massive truck. He could almost hear his uncle's booming voice. "Go, Michael! Let's hit the road!" The camper's engine roared to life as he turned the key. For a moment, he looked back at the house. The sun was casting long shadows across its facade, and a small black and white cat leapt over the fence, returning from its nightly adventures. Michael smiled at the sound of the camper's wheels crunching on the gravel. "Let's hit the road," he whispered, pulling away and leaving the past behind. Michael's first stop wasn't far, just 30 miles down the road at Emily's college campus. She could have stayed at home and commuted, but Emily had been eager for the full college experience. Michael had missed her when she left, but never said so, though Rachel had encouraged her to go, talking up independence and freedom. At the time, he hadn't realized Rachel might have been advocating for her own. He pulled into a small diner just off campus, its red and white awning flapping in the morning breeze. It was early, but that was perfect. It gave him time with Emily before her first class. Through the window, he saw her seated at a table, sunlight catching the blue of her eyes and the warmth of her smile. Everything about the day felt new, as if he were seeing the world through fresh eyes. They embraced tightly before sitting down. "You're really doing this?" Emily asked, her expression both incredulous and amused. Michael grinned. "Let an old man chase a boyhood dream, darling," Emily laughed. "I'll allow as many as you can dream up." They ordered breakfast, the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. Their conversation drifted over fond memories and funny stories, deliberately avoiding the subject of Rachel. Time slipped by too quickly. Michael glanced at his watch and reached across the table to hold Emily's hands. "Em, before I go, I need 3 promises from you," he said. "3?" she teased. "That's all?" "3," he repeated. "First, I want you to be as happy as you possibly can." Her fingers tightened around his. "That's an easy one," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "Promise me," he insisted. She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "Promise," she said softly. "Second," Michael continued, "talk to Rachel. When she calls, give her a chance." The warmth in her expression faltered. "Daddy." "Promise me," he pressed, his grip firm. A long silence followed before Emily gave a reluctant nod. "Promise. But only if she tells the truth." Michael studied her face, then nodded. "Fair enough," he said. "Third," he pulled a shiny quarter from his pocket and held it up. "I want you to flip this coin. Heads, I go east. Tails, I go west." Emily laughed, the heaviness between them lifting for a moment. She took the coin and flipped it high into the air, the silver flashing as it caught the light. When it landed, she slapped it onto her hand and revealed the result. "Tails," she said, grinning. Michael stood and hugged her tightly. They walked out to the parking lot together, where Emily gasped at the sight of the camper. "Wow, Dad, it's huge!" He showed her around, her admiration growing with each detail. Before they parted, he handed her a slip of paper. "This is my new number," he said. "No one else has it. It's just for you." "I promise," she said, tucking it into her bag. They hugged once more, both crying, before Michael climbed into the driver's seat. As he drove away, he saw her wave in the side mirror, her figure growing smaller with each mile. Rachel arrived home to find a single key gleaming on the red doormat. She had expected to shove the door open against a pile of mail and papers, but there was none. Picking up the key, She stepped inside, immediately struck by the silence. Something felt off. Walking into the living room, she noticed a blank spot on the wall above the couch. The photo of Michael and Emily from their Disney trip years ago was gone. She frowned. Who had taken it? Everything else seemed untouched. In the kitchen, an envelope sat propped against a vase Emily had made in elementary school. The single word Rachel was written on the front in Michael's handwriting. Her heart clenched as she stared at it, unwilling to reach for it just yet. After landing earlier that day, Tom had disappeared without so much as helping her collect her luggage. She had barely enough cash for a cab ride home. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, the exhaustion and humiliation of the past few days overwhelmed her. Her trembling hand hovered over the envelope before she finally picked it up. "Congratulations, Rachel," she muttered bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "Well done." Her voice echoed hollowly in the empty room. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. The divorce was finalized without Michael's presence. He'd chosen not to attend, leaving his lawyer to handle the proceedings. Rachel, seated alone in the courtroom, tried to plead her case, insisting she wanted to reconcile. But Michael had already made his decision. His terms were more than fair. Rachel would keep the house and receive a substantial financial settlement. The judge, seeing no grounds for delay, closed the case swiftly despite Rachel's attempts to stall. While Rachel sat in the courtroom, her face a mask of despair, Michael was parked by a tranquil lake miles away. Seated in his camper with a steaming cup of coffee, he watched the sunlight dance on the water's surface. For the first time in years, he felt free, not just from the weight of his marriage, but from the shadows that had clouded his life for so long. As crisp autumn winds swirled through the trees, Michael's heartache had softened into a bittersweet calm. He had done everything he could to end his marriage with dignity, even after enduring the sting of betrayal. Meanwhile, Tom's arrogance became his undoing, a stark reminder of the consequences of crossing the wrong people. His downfall began when he pursued a married woman whose loyalty lay firmly with her husband. Outraged by the affair, the husband sought out a notorious fixer known for handling dirty work. Days later, Tom was discovered in a shallow grave outside the city, a victim of his own reckless decisions. The news of Tom's violent end eventually reached Rachel, compounding the chaos of her already crumbling life. Oblivious to Tom's fate, Michael found solace on the road. Driving mile after mile, the weight of the past began to lift. Though the betrayal still lingered, so did a spark of hope. His camper became a sanctuary, a moving symbol of resilience where he could rebuild his life, free from the lies and manipulations that had once entangled him. Rachel, meanwhile, sat in her darkened room, staring at the empty glass beside her bed. Another sleepless night bore down on her, as harsh words replayed in her mind. "You're only good for one time." The man who said it had smirked as he buttoned his shirt and walked out without a second thought. She swallowed the tears threatening to rise, determined not to cry again. She had convinced herself she could start over. Dating apps, flirty conversations, and late nights out were supposed to be a fresh start. But instead, it felt like a series of hollow encounters, leaving her emptier than before. Each man was the same, charming over drinks, tender in the moment, full of whispered promises that evaporated by morning. When the bed went cold, so did their interest, leaving Rachel with nothing but shame and fleeting memories. She told herself it was fine, that this was how modern dating worked. But deep down, it wasn't fine. She wanted more, something real, something she had once thrown away. Lying in the dark, Rachel's eyes lingered on a framed photo atop her dresser. It was her and Michael, taken years earlier during a mountain getaway. She could almost hear his laughter, feel the steady comfort of his presence. He had been loyal, dependable, and kind, qualities she hadn't fully appreciated until they were gone. Now the men she met barely bothered to pretend they cared. To them, she was nothing more than a fleeting thrill. What stung the most was her pride. Once she had been in control, the one men pursued. Now she was just another fleeting conquest, her name buried in their phones like an afterthought. The realization churned her stomach. For the first time in years, Rachel felt a profound loneliness, not the kind that came from being single, but the kind that stemmed from knowing she had lost something she could never get back. As she lay in the darkness, a painful truth settled over her. She had traded genuine love for fleeting excitement, and now all she had left was an empty bed and a hollow heart.